Hello, friends, and welcome back to Coping with Kim. I'm your host, Kim. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I am a hairstylist and someone who cares deeply about helping people heal and grow. And I've had a lot of time behind the chair, and it just blows my mind how many people are still hurting so much about things they did not know how to cope about, how to process, because no one ever taught them. So in this podcast, we are going to talk about real life emotions, struggles, and the steps we take to become better humans. And remember, we are all just humans trying to evolve into better people. Now, in episode 1, we talked about emotional pain and why it's not a sign of weakness. I hope you all understand that just because you have emotional pain, you are not weak, you're wounded. And in episode 2, we went deeper into identifying and coping with that pain. But today we're going to talk about self-worth, what it is, how it gets damaged, and how we start rebuilding it. So what is self-worth? Well, self-worth is how you see yourself, your value, your sense of being enough, and you are enough. It is not based on your achievements or your looks or how other people treat you. It's deeper than confidence or self-esteem. It's your inner belief that you are worthy of love, respect, and belonging simply because you exist and you are a human being that deserves it. But so many of us don't feel worthy. And why? Why don't we feel worthy? Well, what gets in the way of self-worth? I mean, we need to ask ourselves that. What gets in the way of self-worth? And like I told you, I'm doing this podcast. I've put some research into it and some stories and just some of my thoughts. But I did put a little research into this self-worth, and this is what I came up with. So let's break it down. The first thing that I feel causes self-worth is trauma. Past experiences like abandonment, emotional neglect, or abuse, those things can teach us that we don't matter. And sometimes it's not one big thing, it's years of tiny emotional injuries that pile up and send this message to us. You're not enough. That little voice in our head, you're not enough. Well, we are enough. And if you were constantly told to toughen up, or you were made to feel like your feelings were too much, that leaves a scar. So we are going to reprogram our brain or learn to recognize when these things are happening so we can counteract it with some new information. And I would like to talk about abandonment. That's another thing I think contributes to not feeling self-worth. And abandonment isn't just someone walking out the door. That's usually what we think abandonment is. It shows up in different ways. And each form can deeply damage your sense of self-worth. So there's physical abandonment. For instance, a parent or a caregiver leaves through divorce or death, addiction, or by choice. And you grow up feeling unsafe or alone, or like you have to parent yourself. And then you say, they weren't there when I needed them the most. That's physical abandonment. And then there is emotional abandonment. They're physically present, but emotionally unavailable. And your feelings are usually dismissed or ignored. You might be told you're too sensitive, like, oh, you're just being dramatic or too sensitive. But you were never comforted. And that leaves a lasting silence inside of us. When we are not comforted, that hurts. And then neglect. You weren't nurtured, supported, or guided in any way, form, or fashion. You had to figure it out, how to survive, on your own. And that is tough. We think we know everything, usually at a certain age, but really we don't. We haven't evolved enough or been on this earth long enough to figure it out. Why do they want us to just figure it out? And when you're left on your own to figure out these emotionally, mentally, and maybe even physically experiences in your life, that hurts. That leaves a feeling of emotional abandonment. Like you're sitting around saying, gosh, I raised myself emotionally. And that's tough. And then the inconsistent love. Love was conditional. And some days they were warm, some days cold. But you never knew what version you were going to get. Was it going to be warm, cold, or was I going to get any love that day? And that creates anxiety and teaches you love is unstable because you couldn't count on it. And you might tell yourself, I had to earn love, and even then it never felt safe. And then there's the abandonment in an adult relationship, like being ghosted, cheated on, or emotionally neglected by partners. And you stay hoping they'll change while slowly losing yourself in the process, because they don't. People don't change unless they want to. They left. And then there is the self-abandonment. And that is when you betray yourself to be accepted. Like you quiet your needs, you hide your feelings, or you stay in a situation that hurt you just to avoid rejection. You keep thinking it's going to get better, it's going to get better. But it doesn't. So you may tell yourself, I abandoned myself to keep others from abandoning me. So think about the power that this information that we start thinking in our own minds from these things of abandonment and trauma. But I really wanted to go into the forms of abandonment because there's so many types that I don't think people recognize. And then there is shame. And shame basically tells us, or we tell ourselves, I'm bad. Not I made a mistake, but I am the mistake. And it may tell us that we're unworthy of love or forgiveness. And that is a lie, guys. I'm telling you. You are worthy. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of forgiveness. So you're just bringing shame upon yourself because you don't feel that. You don't feel worthy. And we've got to change that. We can change that. We've all felt shame one way or the other. That happens to all of us. But the thing about it is that the more we feel that, it just seems to grow like in a really silent way that we're not recognizing. And when we don't talk about it, that seems to be when it grows more and grows stronger. And we just get in our heads and we do this thing I call stinking thinking. So, shame can really affect how you feel about yourself and affect your self-worth. And then there is comparison. Boy, that's one we're all experiencing a lot of nowadays with all this social media. We just measure ourselves against others and each other constantly. Their relationships are better than mine, or their bodies, oh my goodness, look how skinny they look. Oh, look, wow, they're successful. I mean, guys, social media is fueling that belief that we're broken and we're behind and we're not enough. But I mean, think about it. You can do all this stuff to make yourself look perfect on social media. There are some people that know how to do that, but then some people don't. And they honestly think that what is going on in that other person's life that is sharing all these perfect events or looks perfect, that there's just no way that I can be like that. And that's not true. They aren't telling you what's going wrong in their lives. They're focusing or putting out there all the perfect stuff, and then they know how to even make it look better with this technology. So, that's not fair, and you've got to acknowledge that's what's going on. And that comparison, it steals our joy and our self-worth because it disconnects us from our own path of where we're headed. We get sidetracked. So just acknowledge that that is what that is. Their lives are not any more perfect than yours. They just have a different set of problems. And then there are toxic people. Well, just some people make us question our own worth through criticism, criticizing us, or control, or manipulation. And, I know people, they just are constantly saying something negative or critical. And before I really started recognizing this, I started almost becoming defensive. Not almost becoming defensive. I did become defensive. I'm thinking, but look at you, look at this, look at that. Not handling that or being able to think about them being in pain, and this is how they deal with their pain, by putting others down. And that really does happen. Or, having to be in control of everything. That is their coping mechanism. And it's not a healthy one. Or trying to manipulate the situation so you can feel what they want you to feel. And they may not even be aware of how they're manipulating you. So, even after that person leaves that, has made you feel, or you've allowed to make you feel this way through their criticism or control or manipulation, just remember, hurt people hurt people. And these hurt people want to pull you down. They want you to feel unworthy, even if they're not aware that they're doing it, because that is how they've learned to cope. And before we move on, I want to say this. If anyone has ever told you that you're too sensitive or you're weak, You're overreacting. You hear me loud and clear. You are not too sensitive or weak or overreacting. You are reactive to a lack of emotional safety. And that's not a weakness. That is your nervous system doing its job, trying to protect you. When we grow up in homes where our feelings were ignored, or we've been in relationships where our pain was dismissed, we don't forget that, even if we try to. So when someone says something hurtful, or even just feels emotionally unsafe, we can feel it deep in our bodies, in our souls. We tense up, we shut down, we over-explain, we cry when we don't want to, we feel small, we may even get angry. But it's not because we're sensitive or dramatic, but because somewhere along the line, we learned it's not safe to be me. So let me remind you of something. It's not your sensitivity that's the problem. It's that you haven't always felt safe. And now you're learning how to be safe with yourself. You're learning to hold space for your own feelings, to stop apologizing for being impacted by emotional harm, to say, I deserve to feel safe, not silenced. So now that we understand how our self-worth gets broken down, what happens to us to make us not feel worthy, but how do we do that? How do we rebuild our self-worth? Well, these are some things that I have researched, and I think that there's some really good ideas. The voice in your head should sound like someone who loves you. Be gentle, be kind, and be patient. You deserve that. Then do it. Follow through with that. Keep those promises. And then a third something we can do is to remove people who make you question your worth. And that's hard to do sometimes. And I get that. But you don't owe anyone access to you. Protect your peace. Protect yourself. And a fourth one is surround yourself with reminders of your value. Have quotes and affirmations and people who reflect back love and respect. And those people are out there. Sometimes we have a habit of drawing ourselves to dysfunctional people, or people that are toxic, or people that make us feel unsafe because we just think that's all we deserve. And somewhere in our mind, we go back to that. But we can do better. We can learn to find people that are more positive, that give love back and respect, and learn to be around them. And that can be the new habit. So let's pause and speak some truth. I love to speak some truth. Facts. Affirmations that remind you of your worth even when it's hard to feel it. So these are some things that we need to speak to ourselves. So I want you to repeat after me. I am not broken. I am healing. I am not broken. I am evolving. I am worthy of love, even as I heal and evolve. I am still growing, still healing, still evolving, and that is more than enough. And here's another good one. I will no longer abandon myself to be loved by others. I'm not doing it anymore. The people who left do not define my worth. It comes, from the abandonment of not feeling worthy because someone left, but they do not define our worth. I deserve consistency, love, and presence, starting with me. Even if others couldn't show up for me, I can show up for myself now. I want you to spend some time journaling and find a quiet moment, grab your notebook, and just get honest with yourself. And these are some prompts that you might write about. What beliefs about myself do I need to let go of? Here's another one. What parts of me am I learning to love? What makes me feel worthy without needing validation? What does healing look like for me? Not for others, for me. Whose voice am I hearing when I criticize myself? What would I say to my younger self who felt unworthy? When did I start feeling like I wasn't enough, and why? How do I talk to myself when I fail or make mistakes? I'm not going to put myself down anymore. Got to recognize that and ask ourselves these questions and journal about them. Here's another one. What does unconditional self-worth look like in action? And the last one that might be helpful is, where am I still abandoning myself to gain approval? You gotta recognize these things before you can do something about them. So these are wonderful journaling prompts that might help you. And these questions are not here to make you feel ashamed. They're here not to make you feel ashamed, but they're here to help you see yourself clearly, to love yourself deeply, and to show up for yourself fully. You are worth that. You matter. So thank you for being here with me today. And if this episode stirred something in you, I want you to know that's not weakness. That's awareness, and that's growth. Your self-worth is not something you have to earn. It is something you were born with, and it's still in you, waiting to be remembered. So until next time, take care of yourself the way you always deserved to be cared for. This is Coping with Kim, and remember, you're not alone in this. We're doing this together.